Samuel Garrett wiped the sweat from his weathered face as his horse picked its way carefully through the rocky canyon. The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly, turning the desert floor into a shimmering furnace. He had been riding for 3 days straight, carrying urgent medical supplies to the settlement at Copper Creek, where a fever had broken out among the miners' families. The silence of the desert was broken only by the steady clip-clop of his mare's hooves and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. Samuel had chosen this remote route to avoid the main trails where bandits were known to prey on lone travelers. At 42, he had learned to trust his instincts, and something about the unusually quiet activity on the regular roads had made him uneasy. As he rounded a bend between two towering red rock formations, the sound of gunshots echoed through the canyon. Samuel immediately pulled his horse to a halt, his hand instinctively moving to the rifle secured to his saddle. The shots came in rapid succession, followed by harsh male voices shouting orders and what sounded like women crying out in distress. Samuel dismounted quietly and led his horse behind a cluster of large boulders. He climbed carefully up the rocky slope to get a better view of what was happening ahead. What he saw made his blood run cold. Below, in a small clearing, 5 rough-looking men had surrounded 2 young Apache women. The women appeared to be sisters, both in their early 20s, with long black hair and traditional clothing that had been torn during what was clearly a violent struggle. The men were dressed like drifters and outlaws, with worn leather chaps, dirty shirts, and gun belts slung low on their hips. Their horses were gathered nearby, and Samuel could see supplies scattered on the ground, suggesting the women had been traveling when they were attacked. One of the men, a tall figure with a thick mustache and a black hat, seemed to be the leader. He was gesturing angrily while speaking to his companions. Samuel strained to hear their conversation and caught fragments of their words carried on the desert wind. The leader was arguing with another man about what to do with the women. The second man, shorter and stockier with a scraggly beard, kept looking nervously toward the canyon entrance, as if expecting someone to arrive. One of the Apache women, the taller of the 2 sisters, was standing defiantly despite having her hands bound behind her back. She spoke in her native language, her voice strong and unafraid even in the face of danger. Her younger sister sat on the ground nearby, also bound, but her eyes showed the same fierce spirit as her sibling. Samuel knew he was outnumbered 5-1, but he could not simply ride away and leave these women to whatever fate the outlaws had planned. He studied the terrain carefully, looking for any advantage he might use. The clearing was surrounded by rocky walls on 3 sides, with only one way in and out through the canyon passage where he now crouched hidden. The outlaws had made camp in the center of the clearing, apparently planning to spend some time there. Their horses were hobbled and grazing on what little grass grew near a small spring that bubbled up from the rocks. Samuel noticed that the men had grown careless, probably assuming they were safe in this remote location. Only one of them was keeping watch, and he was more interested in the conversation than in scanning the surrounding rocks for threats. As Samuel watched, the leader pulled out a piece of paper and showed it to the others. Even from his distant position, Samuel could see that it looked like some kind of official document or map. The men gathered around it, pointing and talking in animated voices. This gave Samuel an idea for how he might create a distraction and even the odds in his favor. He carefully made his way back down to where his horse waited and began to formulate a plan. Samuel had fought in the Civil War and had learned both patience and strategy during those difficult years. He knew that rushing into a fight without thinking would likely result in his death and leave the women in an even worse situation. Samuel checked his weapons methodically. He carried a Spencer repeating rifle, a Colt revolver, and a large hunting knife that had served him well in many dangerous situations. He also had a small supply of dynamite that he used for clearing rocks from trails, though he hoped it would not come to that in such close quarters. The sound of the women's voices drifted up from the clearing again, and Samuel felt his resolve strengthen. Whatever these men planned to do, he could not allow it to happen. He had seen too much suffering and injustice in his lifetime to turn away when he had the power to act. As the afternoon wore on, Samuel observed the outlaws' routine and began to identify weaknesses in their positions. The leader remained in charge, but the others seemed restless and argumentative. Two of them had been drinking from a bottle that was being passed around, which might work in Samuel's favor when the time came to act. The Apache women remained alert and watchful, occasionally exchanging quiet words in their own language. Samuel admired their courage and dignity in the face of such a threatening situation. He had known many Apache people during his years in the territory and had always found them to be honorable and brave, despite the prejudices and conflicts that plagued relations between their people and the white settlers. As the sun began to sink lower in the western sky, Samuel knew he would have to make his move soon. The outlaws showed no signs of releasing their captives, and he feared what might happen when darkness fell. He said a silent prayer for guidance and began to prepare for what would likely be the most dangerous fight of his life. The desert wind picked up slightly, carrying with it the scent of sagebrush and the promise of a cool night ahead. Samuel took one last look at the scene below, memorizing the positions of each man and planning his approach. In a few moments, the peaceful quiet of the canyon would be shattered by gunfire, and the fate of 3 people would hang in the balance. Samuel mounted his horse and began to ride toward the clearing, his heart steady but alert, knowing that everything depended on the next few minutes. The time for watching and waiting was over, and the time for action had finally come. Samuel rode his horse in a wide circle around the canyon, approaching the clearing from the opposite direction. He had spotted a narrow ledge that would allow him to get above the outlaws without being seen. Moving with the stealth he had learned during his army days, he secured his horse and climbed to a position where he could see the entire camp spread out below him. The 5 men had grown even more relaxed as the evening approached. 3 of them were now sitting around a small fire they had built, while the 4th was tending to their horses. The 5th man, the leader with the black hat, stood near the 2 Apache women, apparently interrogating them about something. Samuel could hear the harsh tone of his voice echoing off the canyon walls. Samuel raised his rifle and took careful aim at the water barrel near the fire. A single shot rang out, shattering the container and sending the outlaws scrambling for cover. In the confusion that followed, Samuel quickly shifted position and fired again, this time hitting the coffee pot that had been sitting on the fire. Hot liquid sprayed everywhere, adding to the chaos. The outlaws shouted to each other, trying to figure out where the shots were coming from. Their leader screamed orders while pointing in different directions. But the rocky canyon walls made it impossible for them to pinpoint Samuel's location. This was exactly what Samuel had hoped for. While the men were distracted and seeking cover, Samuel worked his way down the canyon wall toward where the women were being held. The younger Apache sister had seen the direction from which the shots came and was quietly alerting her sister to Samuel's approach. Both women remained perfectly still, understanding that any sudden movement might draw the outlaws' attention to their rescuer. Samuel reached the edge of the clearing just as one of the outlaws spotted him. The man raised his pistol, but Samuel was faster, dropping him with a single shot from his rifle. The sound brought the others running, and a fierce gunfight erupted across the small canyon floor. Moving from rock to rock, Samuel used every bit of cover available while picking off the outlaws one by one. His military training served him well as he advanced steadily toward the women despite the bullets flying around him. The outlaws' panic worked against them, causing them to waste ammunition and expose themselves to Samuel's accurate fire. The leader with the black hat proved to be the most dangerous opponent. He had taken cover behind a large boulder near the women and was using them as protection, knowing that Samuel would not risk shooting in their direction. The man shouted threats and curses while firing wildly at Samuel's position. Samuel realized he needed to change tactics. He pulled out one of his sticks of dynamite and lit the fuse with a match from his pocket. After counting carefully, he threw it toward the opposite side of the clearing from where the women were located. The explosion created a tremendous noise and sent rocks flying in all directions. In the confusion that followed the blast, Samuel sprinted across the open ground toward the women. The leader turned to shoot at him but was tackled by the older Apache sister, who had somehow managed to free herself from her bonds. The two struggled for control of the outlaw's gun while Samuel fought with the last remaining bandit. After what seemed like an eternity but was probably only minutes, silence fell over the canyon. Samuel stood breathing heavily, looking around at the aftermath of the battle. 4 of the outlaws lay dead, while the 5th, the leader, sat with his back against a rock, wounded but alive. The Apache women were both unharmed, though shaken by their ordeal. Samuel quickly cut the ropes that still bound the younger sister and checked both women for injuries. They spoke to him in English, thanking him for his intervention and explaining that they were traveling to visit relatives when they were attacked. The older sister introduced herself as Maria and her younger sibling as Elena. They were daughters of a respected Apache leader from a reservation several days' ride to the south. While Samuel tended to the women, Maria approached the wounded outlaw leader and began searching through his belongings. She pulled out the paper that Samuel had seen the men examining earlier and studied it carefully. Her expression grew troubled as she read, and she called Samuel over to look at what she had found. The document was not what Samuel had expected. Instead of a map or wanted poster, it appeared to be an official-looking letter with an elaborate letterhead. The writing was formal and legal in tone, and it mentioned something about mining rights and land surveys. Maria pointed to specific passages that mentioned Apache territory and compensation payments. Samuel studied the letter more carefully and felt a chill run down his spine. The document appeared to be correspondence between a government official and a mining company, discussing plans to remove Apache families from their traditional lands. What made it even more disturbing was that it mentioned using false claims of Apache raids to justify military action against peaceful communities. Maria explained that her father was one of the Apache leaders who had been negotiating with government officials about protecting their remaining lands. These negotiations had been ongoing for months, and there had been promises that no action would be taken without proper discussions and agreements. This letter suggested that those promises were lies. Elena found more papers hidden in the leader's saddlebags, including detailed maps showing mining claims that overlapped with Apache reservation lands. There were also what appeared to be fake reports describing Apache attacks on settlers, complete with fabricated witness statements and forged signatures from military officers. The wounded outlaw, seeing that his secrets had been discovered, began to laugh bitterly. He told Samuel that he and his men had been hired to create incidents that would justify the government's planned actions against the Apache communities. The attack on Maria and Elena was supposed to be staged to look like they had been killed while raiding a settler camp. Samuel felt sick as the full scope of the deception became clear. The outlaws were part of a larger conspiracy designed to cheat the Apache people out of their lands and possibly provoke a war that would allow the military to take control of valuable mining territory. The letter mentioned substantial payments to various officials and promised shares of mining profits to those who cooperated with the scheme. Maria and Elena looked at each other with growing alarm as they realized the implications for their people. If this plan succeeded, their entire community could be destroyed based on lies and manufactured evidence. Samuel knew that he had stumbled onto something much bigger and more dangerous than a simple outlaw attack. The wounded man continued talking, perhaps hoping for mercy, or maybe just wanting to boast about the cleverness of the plan. He revealed that other groups of hired gunmen were operating throughout the territory, carrying out similar false flag operations. The goal was to create enough incidents to justify a major military campaign that would clear all Apache people from the mineral-rich regions. As darkness began to fall over the canyon, Samuel realized that rescuing Maria and Elena was just the beginning of their troubles. They now possessed evidence of a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government and business, but they were alone in the wilderness, with powerful enemies who would stop at nothing to protect their secret. The real fight was just beginning, and Samuel wondered if they would live long enough to expose the truth. Samuel spent the night keeping watch while Maria and Elena rested near the small fire they had built from the Outlaw's supplies. The wounded leader had died during the night, taking with him any chance of getting more information about the conspiracy. However, the documents they had found provided enough evidence to understand the scope of the deception that threatened the Apache people. As dawn broke over the canyon, Samuel and the two sisters made plans for what to do next. Maria insisted that they needed to warn her father and the other Apache leaders immediately, but Samuel pointed out that returning to the reservation might be exactly what their enemies expected. Elena suggested that they should take the evidence to the territorial capital and present it to honest government officials. But Samuel worried that they had no way of knowing which officials could be trusted. After much discussion, they decided on a different approach. Samuel knew a newspaper editor in the town of Silver Creek who had a reputation for honesty and courage. If they could get the story published in the newspaper, it would be much harder for the conspirators to cover up their crimes. The challenge would be reaching Silver Creek alive with their evidence intact. They buried the dead outlaws in shallow graves and gathered anything useful from their supplies. Samuel was particularly interested in finding more papers that might reveal additional details about the conspiracy. In one of the saddlebags, Elena discovered a small notebook filled with names, dates, and payments. It appeared to be a record of bribes paid to various officials and businessmen involved in the scheme. The notebook revealed that the conspiracy involved not just government officials and mining companies, but also territorial judges, military officers, and even some reservation agents who were supposed to be protecting Apache interests. The amounts of money involved were staggering, suggesting that the mineral deposits on Apache lands were worth far more than anyone had publicly admitted. Samuel studied the maps more carefully and realized that the planned mining operations would not just displace the Apache people, but would completely destroy their traditional way of life. The mining claims covered sacred sites, burial grounds, and the seasonal camps that the Apache had used for generations. This was not just theft, but cultural annihilation. They set out for Silver Creek, taking a route that avoided the main trails and settlements where they might be recognized or reported. Samuel had Maria and Elena dress in clothing taken from the Outlaw's supplies to disguise their Apache heritage, knowing that their appearance might attract unwanted attention from other conspirators or their sympathizers. The journey took 3 days of hard riding through some of the most challenging terrain in the territory. They traveled mostly at night to avoid being spotted and rested during the hottest part of the day in whatever shade they could find. Samuel used his knowledge of desert survival to find water sources and navigate through the maze of canyons and mesas that dotted the landscape. On the second day, they encountered a military patrol that was supposedly searching for Apache raiders. Samuel presented himself as a guide leading 2 Mexican women to relatives in Silver Creek, and his confident manner convinced the soldiers to let them pass without close inspection. However, the encounter confirmed their suspicions that the military was already being positioned to respond to the manufactured crisis. Elena overheard 2 of the soldiers discussing recent orders they had received to prepare for major operations against Apache communities. The soldiers seemed confused about the sudden change in policy, since they had been told just weeks earlier that peaceful negotiations were making progress. This provided more confirmation that the conspiracy was moving quickly toward its final phase. When they finally reached Silver Creek, Samuel was dismayed to discover that the newspaper editor he had hoped to contact had died suddenly the previous week. The new editor was a young man from back east who seemed nervous and uncertain about his role in the community. Samuel wondered if the former editor's death had been natural or if it was connected to the conspiracy they were trying to expose. After careful observation and discreet inquiries, Samuel decided to approach the new editor anyway. Thomas Richardson turned out to be an idealistic young journalist who had come west hoping to make a name for himself by exposing corruption and injustice. When Samuel, Maria, and Elena showed him the evidence they had gathered, Richardson was both horrified and excited by the potential for a major story. Richardson examined the documents carefully and confirmed Samuel's assessment that they represented proof of a massive criminal conspiracy. He was particularly interested in the notebook with the bribery records since it provided specific details that could be verified through other sources. The young editor promised to begin investigating immediately and to publish the story as soon as he could confirm the facts. However, their meeting was interrupted when Richardson's assistant burst into the office to report that a group of armed men had surrounded the newspaper building. Samuel looked out the window and recognized some of the faces from wanted posters he had seen in various towns. These were not ordinary outlaws, but professional killers who had been hired to eliminate anyone who threatened the conspiracy. Samuel realized that their enemies had somehow tracked them to Silver Creek, possibly through informants in the military patrol they had encountered. The situation was desperate, as they were trapped in a wooden building surrounded by gunmen who had no intention of letting them escape alive. Richardson proved to have more courage than Samuel had expected. The young editor quickly gathered the most important documents and hid them in a secret compartment he had built into his desk. He then armed himself with a shotgun and took position at one of the windows, declaring that he would rather die fighting than allow the truth to be suppressed. Maria surprised everyone by revealing that she had been trained in combat by her father and brothers. She had been carrying a concealed knife throughout their journey and was prepared to use it if necessary. Elena, though younger and less experienced in fighting, showed the same fierce determination that had helped her survive the original attack by the outlaws. Samuel knew that they could not win a direct fight against so many opponents. But he also knew that giving up would mean certain death and the continuation of the conspiracy against the Apache people. He began to formulate a desperate plan that might allow them to escape and ensure that the evidence would reach the outside world. The sound of breaking glass announced that the attack had begun. Samuel and his companions prepared to make their final stand, knowing that everything they had fought for hung in the balance. The truth about the conspiracy was finally within reach of being exposed, but first they would have to survive the next few minutes against overwhelming odds. Outside, the hired killers closed in on the newspaper office, confident that they could eliminate the threat to their employer's plans. They had no idea that inside the building, 4 determined people were preparing to fight for justice with everything they had, even if it meant sacrificing their lives to ensure that the truth would eventually come to light.